Welcome everybody. Kia ora, greetings, and thank you for being here. My name is Sienna Craig, for those of you who I don't know, and I'm a professor in anthropology and the South House professor here at Dartmouth. And it's with true delight that I welcome you here today for Dr. Marama-Muru Lanning's public lecture. Many people and units across campus have joined together to bring Marama back to Dartmouth and to welcome her PhD student and research associate, Nicholas Jones, to our campus. They've come all the way from Aotearoa, from Auckland, New Zealand. Their week-long visit has been supported by my home Department of Anthropology, as well as the Department of Native American and Indigenous Studies, the John Sloan Dickey Center for International Understanding, which is, of course, hosting us here in this room, and South House. I'd particularly like to thank Professor Bruce Dutu, Chair of NAIS, Jerry De Silva, Chair of Anthropology, Don Carey at the Dickey Center, Julie Gilman and Lori Furch, who are the expert administrators, both in anthropology and NAIS, and Lars Blackmore for his beautiful poster design for this talk. Marama-Muru Lanning is an associate professor of anthropology and the co-director of the James Henare Research Center at the University of Auckland. Her research is dedicated to transdisciplinary efforts with Māori communities that prioritizes equity and social justice. As a social and cultural anthropologist, she focuses on the cultural specificity of tangata whenua, or people of the land, and groups and their unique sense of place and belonging in Aotearoa, which, for those of you who don't know, is the Māori word for especially the North Island of New Zealand. What distinguishes Marama both in New Zealand and internationally as a social scientist is her specialization in 4 interrelated areas of research. She focuses on water, on human-environment relations in a broader sense, in mātauranga, Māori, which is basically Māori knowledge, values, and philosophy, and transdisciplinary research methods. She works across many different areas and spaces in the institution. And over the past 5 years, she's also developed a really wonderful and abiding passion advancing new approaches and methods for researching kaumatua, or Māori elders. And she's done this in collaboration with other colleagues at the James Henare Research Center. Her book, Tupuna Awa, People and Politics of the Waikato River, is a truly masterful and very nuanced ethnography that examines how changing discourses around the Waikato River affect the relationships between the Crown, commercial entities such as power companies, and the people of the region for whom the Waikato is not simply a body of water, but a tupuna, an ancestor. As Marama will undoubtedly also share in her own way and her own words, she's from the Waikato region, specifically Turangawaiwai Marae and Ngāroa Wahia, a place that is a potent living memorial to many Waikato people taken by the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918, and you'll hear about that a bit in her talk today. She's also the chair of the Waikato Tainui Endowed College and has whakapapa, or genealogy, that connects her to Waikato, Ngāti Maniapoto, and Ngāti Whatua. We'll hear again more about these connections in Marama's talk. I'm also really thrilled to share with you all that Marama will be returning to Dartmouth next fall for a longer visit as the distinguished Gordon Russell visiting professor in NAIS, and she'll be teaching a class cross-listed between NAIS and anthropology. So finally, and more personally, Marama is a friend to me personally and to Dartmouth. As a scholar-teacher, she has been pivotal in the creation and the continuation of our foreign study programs in linguistics and anthropology in partnership with the University of Auckland, a partnership that dates back more than 2 decades, probably as long as many of the students in this room are old. In this sense, but she's evergreen. In this sense, she has helped to facilitate deep learning for many generations of students, as well as for faculty like me and others in this room, about the sustained impacts of settler colonialism in Aotearoa and more broadly across the world, about the undeniability as well as the complex lived experiences of Indigenous sovereignty, about decolonial possibilities, and about the sacred importance of relationships, interconnections and interdependencies that are bigger than us and that course like a river through us all. So join me in welcoming Dr. Marama-Muru Lanning.
Kia ora Siena. Tuatahi he mihi ki ngā atua. Ngā mihi ki a koutou ki ngā tangata whenua, no tēnei whenua. Me whakahōnore ki tā tātou kingi tūheitia, i ngā mana, i ngā reo, i ngā kārangaranga maha, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. A tēnā koe a te ihorangi Bruce Dutu, tēnā koe te rangatira. Tēnā koe taku hoa Siena, tēnā koe i te maraikura. Tēnā koe o tēnā koutou, ngā kaumatua ki reira, ko Kirk, ko Karen, Rawa, ko John, aku o oku hoa rangatira mo te wā nei. Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you everybody for inviting me here. This is a pretty big audience for me, so I'm a little bit nervous. I'd also, for those of you that didn't understand the mihi to open, it's just warm greetings to you all. Warm greetings to the ancestors the original ancestors of this whenua. Warm greetings from here to my own people back in Aotearoa. Warm greetings to Professor Dutu and to Siena and to my dear friends Kirk, Karen and John, who I have known for over 20 years now. So, and also I'm very happy that Nick is here to push the slides along for me because I sometimes forget when I get a bit into my kōrero, and sometimes I go off script as well, so I'm definitely going to be going off script. Thank you to the sponsors who have brought me here. I hope I don't disappoint, probably disappoint myself, but anyway, I'm just going to roll on if that's okay. Yeah. So my talk today is really about some research that I have been doing over the last 3 years with my research centre team. And it's a privilege to present it to you today, but I just want to acknowledge that this research that you're going to see today is not mine alone. There are at least 12 other junior, middle career and senior researchers, and when I mean senior, I mean 80-year-olds, that have been involved in this little piece of research that you're going to see today, so I can't take credit for everything. I can take credit for the slides and also for this bit, but mostly it was a collaborative team effort. And I also want to say that most of my team are Māori. Pretty much everybody in my research team is Māori, although we do, from time to time, and at the moment we have 3 non-Māori researchers, one from Cambodia, one from Pakistan, and two Pākehā New Zealanders. So I mean, if the person fits with the team, I don't care what colour you are or where you come from, as long as you're there to uplift Māori and create equity, I'm pretty happy to have you on my team. So here we go. When Covid-19 arrived in Aotearoa on the 28th of February 2020, Māori responded quickly. Local health providers and tribal leaders were active, advising marae, or Māori settlements, to modify social engagement practices and restrict hongi, the pressing of noses, kihi, kisses, and harirū, handshakes. It soon became evident that kaumatua, older Māori men and women, were especially vulnerable to the virus, given their age, compromised health, and living situations. Before government regulations were put in place, marae were beginning to restrict or cancel gatherings in order to protect their communities and to prevent transmissions of the disease. These protective actions posed challenges for Māori, and especially kaumatua, whose attendance at marae and involvement in cultural practices have been shown to underpin Māori wellbeing. Not only do marae promote social engagement and integration for many older Māori, They also mitigate social isolation and provide opportunities for leadership. The New Zealand government also moved rapidly, putting our country into an alert level 4 lockdown from May 25th of March to the 27th of April in 2020, while restrictions at level 3 both before and after these dates. Over the next 18 months, Auckland City, where I live, experienced rolling lockdowns every time COVID numbers emerged in our region. Older people were advised that they should stay at home within their bubble, limiting exposure to potential carriers of the virus, unless shopping for groceries, making health visits or exercising close to home. Each household was a bubble, and face-to-face contact with people outside your bubble was restricted. 2 households could be joined if there were single persons living in one of the households. Lockdown rules were put together speedily without consultation with Māori and with limited consideration of Māori communities. Among the more contentious decision was the restriction on the number of people allowed to attend a tangihanga, or Māori funerals. The numbers allowed to attend a tangihanga were restricted to 10 people. This decision was disappointing and distressing for Māori, who were already taking steps to protect themselves from the virus. Many felt that the government had imposed restrictions without little regard to the practices and attitudes of Māori. Death and the grieving process at tangihanga had developed over many generations. This is the most significant expression of tikanga, or the Māori way of doing things, or a fluid type of customary law, L-A-W, not L-O-R-E, and Māori cultural identity. Tangi, literally weeping, draws attention not only to the grieving process, but to the physical expression of grief and the shedding of tears and bodily fluids. When a person dies, family come together in a designated space, usually a marae or the family home, to connect with the past and past and present to honour the dead and pay their respects to the family. Roimata, or tears, and hupe, mucus, are especially important components of the tangihanga process and have deep symbolic meaning. Roimata and hupe are tangible symbols of grief that are metaphorically wrapped in love, brought and laid down before the deceased person and family during a tangihanga. In the mourning process, roimata and hupe are used symbolically to embrace the body and thereby mitigate the pain and sorrow of the bereaved. Gestures of welcome to those gathered for the tangi are similarly important as a physical and spiritual connection involving the hongi, harirū, and sometimes kihi. The hongi is a greeting that involves the pressing of noses and the exchange of hau, or breath. It carries deep spiritual meaning for Māori. It is the sign of life and immortality, as well as peace and well-being. In Māori tradition, the mauri and the hau is like the hau is the breath, and the mauri is the well-being, of the great ancestor god, Tāne Mahuta, was blown into Hene Ohuone, the first woman, and causing her to sneeze and giving its origin to when you come to New Zealand, you'll hear people say Tihei Mauri ora, which is the breath of life. So this is the first ancestor breathing life into the first woman, and we get Tihei Mauri ora, and thus creating humankind. The hongi, harirū, and the sharing of hau are gestures that are integral to tikanga Māori and to te ao Māori, which is the Māori world. But they cannot contribute to the spread of the virus, which is a different way of thinking to our government at the time. So my talk outlines Waikato, a large tribe of the Tainui Confederation's experiences and understandings of COVID and infectious disease in relation to our history, our tikanga, and measures taken in light of rapidly evolving advice and regulations regarding personal distancing, self-isolation and gathering. So from now on, let the slideshow begin, and I'm going to go off script and just talk to you like human beings. So today, In my talk, you will hear about the impacts of the Spanish flu on Māori, and you'll see how this is all connected to the pandemic response from Māori. I'm also going to talk about homelessness in New Zealand, evolving from firstly what we know as raupatu, or the confiscations of Māori lands in the 1860s, and then the Spanish flu pandemic of the 1980s, again creating another type of homelessness for Māori all over New Zealand. I will talk about the establishment of Tūranga Waiwai marae, which evolved out of the Spanish flu, which is my marae, and my grandparents were taken there as children because their parents were heavily impacted during the Spanish flu. My grandfather's parents did not die of the Spanish flu, but they were part of a group of young people whose parents became unable to work in their territory because of the Spanish flu. So they came to Tūranga Waiwai and created Tūranga Waiwai. There was no Tūranga Waiwai there before. It was just a piece of land with blackberries and bush. And so they are foundational people there, and they created this, what you will see is an amazing marae. We will also talk today about the intent to create a Māori hospital to deal with inadequate Māori health services provision, and that idea emerged out of the marae where I am from. And we'll also talk about the more recent COVID responses driven by the marae that I'm from. The research that the research that my colleagues and I did when we were all in lockdown for 2 years, in and out of lockdown, and also our latest piece of funding from Taniwha for some new infectious disease research. So we're going to compress about 150 years into 40 minutes. I don't think I can do it, but I'll have a go. So, oops. Ko taupiri te maunga, ko Waikato te awa. Ko te whero te tangata, he piko he taniwha, Waikato taniwharau. So this is where I am from in New Zealand. You'll see this big river. That is the Waikato River. And if I can just... So my marae, Tūranga Waiwai, is here at Ngā Rua Wahia on this side of the river. So on this side of the river, that's where all the Māoris live. And on the other side of the river is where all the non-Māoris live. So we are divided by a river. And actually all of that land, you're going to see all of that land used to be Māori land, but when the British invaded the Waikato in the 1860s, they actually confiscated 1.2 million hectares of our land. So we have no land left except for this marae site. So as you will see in this picture here, these are all the tribes in Aotearoa, and there are many. For a small place, we have many tribes. And if you can, wait on. So the orange tribes here, where you see Ngāti Mahuta, sort of orange and a bit of red, that is all Tainui Confederation. Sort of like the Iroquois Confederation, the Tainui Confederation is made up of Ngāti Maniapoto, Ngāti Raukawa, Ngāti Haua, Hauraki and Waikato. And we get our name Waikato because we are along the Waikato River, and there is Lake Taupo, and the Waikato River goes sort of right up to there, and we're all the orange bits. So all of that really was land that was confiscated. Yeah. So in 1858, I'm just going to give you a brief history. In 1858, Pōtitau Te Whero became the first Māori king. And the reason he became a Māori king, and this was agreed upon by all of the Māori in the North Island, was to prevent land being taken. At this time, they were getting the feeling that people wanted our nice flat land, and then at that time they installed a Māori king, but he was 80 when he was king, and he didn't, that's pretty old, way back then, and he actually died 2 years later. So while he was alive, we still had not had our land confiscated. So his son then became the next Māori king, King Tāwhiao. In 1863, our lands were invaded by the British militia, and they were taken. And they were taken because we were told that we were rebellious people. So think of me, it's 7 generations before me that this is happening. So that's my great-great-great-great-great-grandparents' time, or even more great. what occurred was that Māori who were pushed off their land into other kin lands were having to live as refugees. And where the British militia took our lands and where the Māori lands stayed, they created a boundary which is referred to as the Aukati. So my relations went to live in the territory of Ngāti Maniapoto, which is the people below our territory. Still in the orange in the map, but quite a bit below. And Ngāti Maniapoto lands are not as fertile and they are more hilly, a lot more limestone in the soil, not as good for agriculture. So they were wanting our lands for the agriculture. In 1884, and this is a big history, King Tawhiao, who was the second Māori king, he was a prophet, and somehow he got himself onto a boat and went to England and met with, well, he didn't actually meet, he tried to meet with the British Crown to petition for our land back. But back in those days, they didn't really give much time to Māoris, and even though he said he was a king, he wasn't a king from Europe, so they wouldn't give him an audience. But in that 6 weeks, or that year that he was away, he learnt a lot about the British mind and how they structured their life over in England. And this was important in creating a new identity for our tribe, because where I come from, we are known as the Kingitanga, which is kind of a Māori version of the British aristocracy in England. And in 1914, we had another Māori king. So what happens with being a king? It usually goes to the oldest son of the oldest son, just like in England. You know how Charles is the king now? That's how we had this notion of primogeniture in my tribe about who would inherit the kingship. And so now we're on to in my mihi to you, I acknowledge Kiingi Tuheitia, who is actually the 7th Māori king. And they've all been men, except for the 6th Māori ariki, or paramount chief, who was a woman. And that was only because she didn't have any brothers. Very interesting. So I also want to say that in 1921, Tūranga Waiwai Marae, where I am from, was established by Princess Te Puia, one of the nieces of the third Māori king. And the significance of the establishment of our marae was that it was born out of the Spanish flu pandemic. This is when all the orphans came to live in Ngāroa Wāhia because many of their parents had died, and this woman who had no children but had great vision decided that she would make a place for all of these homeless children and their families and give them some hope. And so she bought a little rubbish dump area. And today, for those of you that have been to Tūranga Waiwai Marae, which John has been to, and I think Sienna has been to, you'll see that it is the most magnificent marae, but actually built on a rubbish dump. So this is just a photo of the first Māori king, Pō Te Tau Te Wherowhero, the 80-year-old king that lived for 2 years. And this is his son, King Tawhiao, who was a king that reigned for almost 30 years. He was very long-serving, and he went to England. This is the king that went to England that didn't get the audience with the British Crown, and he was the person that took Māori through their period of pauritanga, their period of poorness. And so he was a king that had no land, and so he was kept in office by the generosity of his kin. And the reason that the first Māori king was selected as Māori king was because he had power. We will say he has mana tangata. He has influence of people. He has mana atua. He has the eyes of the god. You know, he has the gods on his side. And he has mana kai. Because of the Waikato River in his territory, he was able to provide food for all of the people that came to his territory. And so when we didn't lose our land, it was taken from us. We still had access to the Waikato River, which was a great provider for the people back then. And when the land was confiscated in 1863, all of the people in Waikato, then there were many, were actually forced to go and live in other regions with their kin, and of course that puts pressure. You go from being a very influential group of Māoris with lots of mana, power and authority, to actually refugee status and dependent on the kindness of your relations. And I mean, that's quite difficult to take, I think. So this is the area that was taken in the Raupatu. So we have all of that land taken there. That's land that we had taken. Not all Māori tribes, as you can see, experience Raupatu. It's just Waikato, some from the Bay of Plenty, that's Ngāti Awa, some from Tauranga, the tribes from Taranaki. I'm not sure who's, that's Ngāti Kahuna, Rongomatane. So not all tribes experienced the Raupatu that we did. And the Raupatu means that you were invaded by the British. I mean, it's not that you were diddled out of your land on paper. You were actually invaded with soldiers coming in and taking your land by force. So you can see there. And so I'm a seventh generation person who has come out of a landless people, from having lots of land to no land. So that was the first part of homelessness for Waikato Māori, the Raupatu. Then in 1920, the Spanish flu came to New Zealand on the boat. It was during the World War, someone brought it over on a boat and it impacted Māori. And it killed Māori by the thousands. And so there were a lot of children that were left without any parents. And so Princess Te Puia, who you'll see in a slide later, gathered up all of those children and took them to Ngaruawahia and decided she would build a marae for the nation, a marae that the government could not look away from, and a marae that was essentially a haven and a place of security for people who were homeless. And they came from all of those tribes that I showed you. They came from tribes from all over. My grandfather is actually Ngāti Whātua from Auckland. My grandmother is from Kāwhia. This is my dad's parents. They were both came to Turangawaewae in the 1920s in order to help build the marae. And my grandfather was 6 and my grandmother was even younger. She might have been 5. So this is Princess Te Puia. She was a princess and she was a woman with great vision. And she had a very strong will, and she also was very good at making relationships. She was also a really hard worker. So while she was a princess, looking very royal and, like the real deal here, she also worked in the kitchen. She was a gardener. She birthed babies. She created Māori medicine. So she was that all-rounder type of person. And she started doing all of this in her early 30s. She never had any children herself, but she became the mother of the tribe. So she established Turangawaewae Marae in 1921. As I said, the marae was built on rubbish dump land, and it became the home of the destitute, the bereaved, and orphans. Her ultimate goal was to create a hospital for Māori to radically transform Māori health, because our health had declined so rapidly with the arrival of Europeans. They brought syphilis, they brought flus, they brought all sorts of diseases that we didn't have any immunity to. I mean, I think this has happened all over the world with Indigenous people. So this is a very important day. She built this marae out of nothing. There were no jobs around. And so these orphans that she cultivated at Turangawaewae became her workforce. And they would go up into the Hakarimata Ranges behind us or go up north and collect wood from there to make the marae. She got one of our carvers from another iwi to teach them how to carve. None of them knew how to do this, but she just made it happen. None of them went to school. There was no education. And so they learnt everything within the community. And they also created a kapahaka group that toured around the North Island of New Zealand, playing musical songs for money. And that's how they made their money, by just doing basic labouring and also being by day they were a kapahaka group, and then by night they became a band. And so that's how they made their money. So my grandfather, he wasn't very good at kapahaka, but he could play the saxophone. So he was a saxophone player, and my grandmother was very good at kapahaka, but could not play any musical instruments. So, and I can't do either. So, But those are the sorts of things that they self-taught in order to raise money to create this marae. Now, that is Tūranga Waiwai marae there, back in the 1940s. And so we have Tūrongo here, and all of the houses at our marae have these very amazing names. And Tūrongo is a name from the Kāwhia area, and the name of this one here, Mahinarangi, is a name from the Ngāti Porou East Coast. So when you're building a house, you also name it so as that you're connecting other tribes. And can you just go back to the other slide, please? So this guy here is a man by the name of Apirana Ngata, Sir Apirana Ngata, and he was the chief of the East Coast. She was the chief of the West Coast, and it was really important to bring the East and the West Coast of our country together. And he was the first Māori politician, and he could get money from the government to fund Princess Tupuia's initiatives. And she had lots of initiatives. She was one of those painful people that always had a good idea and always needed you to help her. Yeah, and she just had a very strong character, but they kind of loved her because they knew she would get the job done. Okay. So this is her building. This is sort of a building dedicated to Sir Apirana Ngata and the East Coast people. And my grandfather, he was from Ngāti Whātua, and he comes from a carving family, the Murupaenga family, we're carving people. And so my grandfather and his brothers were instrumental in the carvings of this building here, these popo. And that carving tradition has gone through the line of my family, to the point that my son he can't read a thing, dyslexic, but he's an architecture student and he can see, he can see the layers and things. So I think my whole family of the males is dyslexic, but they can see those other things. So, yeah. And that is Tūrongo there, representation of Kāwhia. So that's just two houses. Now, so during this period, because we're talking, almost 100 years now. We're talking 100 years of Tūranga Waiwai. So the marae the building Mahinarangi was built in 1940. And at that time, the marae was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And we had a tuberculosis outbreak at our marae. And that's when Princess Tupuia really realised that we didn't have the health amenities to look after our people. In fact, most people at our marae got tuberculosis, to the point where my dad's brother, his name is Matekohe, which means tuberculosis. So he was born at the time of peak tuberculosis. So you will name people in your community with regard to events that are happening. And so we always used to call our Uncle Matekohe. We never actually knew that he was named after tuberculosis, but he was. And as you know, you'll know about how tuberculosis spreads, but we were living in pretty rough conditions, not because we wanted to, but because there was no help from the government, or there was just no money for us to do anything. So when you're living in cramped places, confined places that aren't ventilated the best, but you're doing the best that you can, because you're putting all your energy into these big buildings to sort of legitimate your cultural identity, a lot of people where I'm from got tuberculosis, to the point that when I was 6, we all got checked. I mean, this was a generation before me, but when I was 6, we were still being tested for TB, and so I got injected for TB when I was very, very young, and so I hate needles now. But that was a common thing. We all got injected, and it was thought that we would all get TB. So the marae, and you haven't seen it because it's quite grand, but my grandparents' house is across the road from the front gates of the marae. And as a child, I lived in the house behind my grandparents' house. And my grandparents, my grandfather and my dad and my uncle, they built this house because everybody had to build their own house. So this house was built in the 1940s, and it's still standing. And now this is my house. So I have a house at the marae, which I'm responsible for because, one, I'm the oldest granddaughter, so it usually goes to the oldest daughter to keep it open for everybody. But in our situation, I also own the house. My husband and I bought the house, and having two houses, one in Auckland and one in Ngaruawahia, it's extremely tiring to keep both houses going all the time. And it's a real commitment to the marae, which is right across the road. And the jobs of my grandparents, my grandfather was the carver, and my grandmother was a gardener. And so it was my grandmother's job and her friends to make sure that the marae gardens always looked amazing. So they weeded the gardens. I think I'm supposed to be doing that too, but I haven't started yet. So that is what I'm striving for, to become this gardener out the front of the marae. And it's really important that we keep our house looking amazing. We've just done a renovation, because it's all about the look when because the Prime Minister will come, they have to go past our house to get into the marae. Or, you know, the ambassador of wherever, you have to go past our house to actually get into the front entrance of the marae. So it's a huge responsibility. Hence, I've got the nice dress, you know. So now, when COVID came to New Zealand in 2020, our marae is considered to be a marae that is open for everybody. It's always open. It's a very special marae, but it's open to everybody. However, at this time, for the first time ever, my marae closed. When COVID came to New Zealand, our paramount chief, with regard to all the kaumatua that were living in the area, because they all live very close or on the marae, they shut the marae. So those cones there are saying that you can't come into our marae. And I was shocked. I'd been in Hamilton and I came home to the other house in Ngaruawahia, and I was thinking, wow, the marae is closed. That's never happened before. And they closed it instantly using Māori tikanga, while the rest of New Zealand was still operating. So we closed before the rest of New Zealand. And so those are the front gates. Those are the official gates where we welcome the Prime Minister and all the hoi polloi people. There's actually 4 sets of gates on our marae. The gates for the king, which nobody else ever uses except him. These gates for the dignitaries. Then there's the public gates. And then there's the workers' gates, and then there's the car gates. So you've got to figure out which gate you can enter the marae by. Once you go into our marae, you're not allowed to smoke cigarettes, vape, no drugs, no alcohol. It's a tapu place. It's a sacred place. So across the road from our marae is what we call our hauora. Now, the hauora is where we deal with all of our health issues. And there is a doctor there and a full service team, but it's not a hospital. It's just a hauora for people to, if they have really serious issues, they still have to go to the hospital in Hamilton. Now, this is a real problem for Princess Tupuia, our Māori leader, because she wanted a hospital to be built on the marae. And even though she had the building and she had the funds from all the people that fundraised, the New Zealand government would not give her a certificate to open a Māori hospital on our marae because they didn't think we could handle it. So instead, we've suffered through years and years and years of Māori health inequality, and our people have had barriers to getting medicine, to getting health services, to getting doctors, because they think that we could not handle this initiative. And so they just let us have nothing. Anyway, we started COVID testing early, as well as the COVID testing on one side of the hauora, or the health office. We also had vaccinations happening. We had both things happening, and it was delivered by Māori, people that were trained in giving the tests and the vaccinations. And this hauora, this health authority, is right next to our house. So if you come to New Zealand and want to have a Māori experience, I have got, on one side, I've got the Māori King's house, the marae, the hauora, the kaumatua village, and the toilets, all in the vicinity. It's just like the total experience. So now, really important in the Māori experience of COVID and the pushback against government policies and regulations, treating New Zealanders all as one and not recognising Māori difference of view on things like tangihanga. You have these three men, unfortunately men, but these are the big chiefs in Aotearoa. So this here is King Tuheitia, who is the 7th Māori king, and he is the man with the house across the road, or one of his houses. He's got a lot of houses. And then this is the paramount chief of Tūwharetoa, and you saw the big lake in the first picture. He is the chief of all of that area. And he's a very impressive chief. And this is what we call, he's passed away now, this is the kingmaker. And so these three men have been joined together for 7 centuries. Their ancestors all helped one another to prevent this land. When it came to the land being taken by the crown, whether it's dealing with the Spanish flu, whether it's dealing with the government, whether it's dealing with COVID, it is the ancestors of these three men, and they are the incarnation of the ancestors, that are the faces that legitimate the Māori story. And so they decided that they would make a poster without checking with the Prime Minister or anybody, because we had this anti-vax movement going on in New Zealand at the time, and a lot of Māori were being roped in because they were a bit anti-government anyway, and they saw the anti-vax movement as a way to make a statement against government, but they were putting their health and the health of their whānau family members at risk by becoming anti-vaxxers. So these three men stood up and took the anti-vaxxers on the head and told them that they should really be vaccinating their children or their grandchildren, so as that Māori would continue to be significant in Aotearoa. And it was an extremely political move, and it was something that the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Health and our scientists were not a part of, And what had happened was, because Māori had not been seeing themselves on TV, every 1 o'clock during our COVID lockdowns, the Prime Minister and the head of the COVID response, our person in charge of health in New Zealand, would make a 1 p.m. Announcement to the country, because remember, we were all locked down in bubbles, and they would make a 1 p.m. announcement telling us what the rules were for the day, whether we were still in a lockdown 4, what the numbers of COVID were throughout New Zealand, what supermarkets you could go to. They were giving us the latest news. So we were actually in a lockdown for a very long time, but not once did they really put any Māori faces. It was always white faces. Sorry to those of you, but every day, and this was 7 days a week, every day for 1 hour, you would have these white faces telling you what the rules were for you today. And so that's why this is really important, because these guys went in and created because they weren't going to get any television time, so they created this poster that went around virally. Now, all the while we're in lockdown, I've got a business to run at the University of Auckland. We've got research projects that we can't do because we are qualitative researchers, and the whole point of qualitative research is that you go out there and you work with people. So in New Zealand, when we went into lockdown, I think I was at work with you, wasn't I? I was sitting in my office and I was just doing my thing as usual, and it was, you came in and you said, "Marama, we're going into a lockdown." And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" He says, "I think we have to go home. We have to take our computers home." And I said, "Well, when do we come back?" And he says, "I don't know. I don't think we are coming back." And I was like, "Yeah, whatever, sure." But it was true. The lockdown was announced at 4 o'clock on Tuesday, and there was no plan. There was no plan. Can you suddenly imagine what it's like to be told you've got to go home and work from home and you don't know when you're coming back to work? That was what happened to us. Anyway, I went outside and all of a sudden, our university's got very strict rules about taking things out of the university. And all I could see was all these people taking out their computers, laptops, screens, all this machinery, and none of it was labelled. I'm not sure how much they got back, but it was like, you know what I mean? It was just like a mass stealing of the University of Auckland infrastructure, technology infrastructure. So I popped my laptop in the bag and I said to Nick, "Okay, well, I'll see you tomorrow." But it didn't happen. We were in lockdown for ages. And during this lockdown period, when you suddenly can't do your job, because I don't teach all the time, I only teach some of the time, I had to manage a team from at home, and everybody here will know what that's like. But what I was really worried about was that we just won 3 really big research projects, and we had deadlines and milestones to hit, and we couldn't do any of the research. Now, go back to the slide with the, back again, yeah. So when I saw this happen at home, it was about 3 weeks before we went into lockdown, and I still hadn't realised we were going to go. I said to my colleagues, I think we should write a project about being locked down, because I just saw that my marae was locked down. So we wrote this project, and we just said, what's a good title? I said, Hongi Harirū Ho, because that's where your mucus comes out. Hongi, the pressing of noses, Harirū, handshakes, and Ho, the air that we breathe. And it was a really catchy thing, Hongi Harirū Ho, kaumatua in the time of Covid-19. And it also happened that we're working with a lot of kaumatua at that time. So we were getting a lot of feedback from them about, what might this project look like. And so with that kaumatua group and with the group, the James Henare group, you can push on, we suddenly designed this project that we could all do as a team at the same time. It meant I could check in with everybody, see what they're up to. And we all dedicated our energy to this. It was a 3-month project. And during that 3 months, somehow, I don't know how we managed to do it, but we managed to do 64 interviews with kaumatua in the Waikato and Ngāti Wai regions, sort of a daily, hearing about what they did every day. 62 interviews, that was pretty good, and that project was actually funded because we put it in 4 weeks earlier before we actually went into lockdown, thinking we might go into lockdown. We were the only Māori team to win rapid COVID response money. And so this is most of the team in the Zoom room actually talking, we're actually talking with one another, and you can see this here is Whaia Parehopa, this is Whaia Silla, and this is Whaia Huia Dixon. Now, Whaia Huia has quite a bit of dementia. Whaia Silla, she's sharp as, and Whaia Huia has very swollen legs. So the online Zoom thing suited them really well. They could boss us around from their homes, and these 3 women led this kaumatua research project, telling us what they wanted, and I had to try and make sense of what they wanted. And then they had this team of experienced researchers just twiddling their thumbs at home, and they got everybody cracking. So is that we did this project, and from the project, it's kind of travelled all over New Zealand, all over the world, and it was just because we were locked down and because we didn't have anything else to do. There was nothing else we could do, so we threw ourselves into this project, and it was extremely successful. Meanwhile, I went through some personal distress because in 2020 my dad got very unwell because I was in lockdown in Auckland and he lived in the Waikato, and I was not allowed to visit my dad, and Dad actually passed away during that period of me being in lockdown. And in order to get out of Auckland, I had to go to my friend Henare, who's a doctor, who knew the head of the Ministry of Health, to get papers to sign me to let me go to see my dad in hospital. And I got there just in time, but he died during lockdown. He didn't die of COVID, but he died in the COVID period when the tangihanga restrictions were not 10 at that stage, they were 50. So we had to try and because we didn't, because Dad had been quite a well-known orator in the Tainui Waka, the marae had been closed since March, since the first part of, since COVID had first been thought of, and it was still closed in August when Dad passed away. And I just thought, if my marae do not open the marae up for Dad's funeral, I didn't say anything, I was just very calm, and I looked at the head kaumatua and I just looked at him and I said, Tūranga waiwai, and he said, don't worry, we'll make it happen. And so they opened the marae up, and Dad had a proper tangihanga in August 20. And that was pretty huge because it had been closed for 8 months. No, not 8 months, 6 months. And anyway, coming onto the marae for Dad's tangihanga, we still had a lot of protocols. And this is Angela, and she's rat testing everybody that comes onto the marae, and they have to sit and wait for their tests to come out, and they have 2 tests, And so this is how Māori are managing COVID at this time. And so we put all these things into place really quickly. And that was the thing about tikanga. Māori tikanga, it's kind of like Māori law. It's a type of rapid law or cultural process that wraps around the whole people, that wraps around the people very quickly and creates an instant solution to problems. And so that's why tikanga is a really important thing, and it is kaumatua that can institute a tikanga. It's very different to the rigid, concretised type of law that the New Zealand government were putting out. We had own laws on our spaces that we could use to awhi or look after the whānau. And this is the difference between the two types of law. And so there she is testing everybody, and she was a volunteer. Everybody's a volunteer. And COVID was very difficult for us as a research centre because we work with older people. And even though we were back at work, the COVID situation at Auckland was very up and down. And when COVID was found in our community, and often it's wastewater testing, they're testing the wastewater and finding it at certain places, we have to go back into lockdown. If you're working with a lot of older people, like we were all the time, often our research is getting stopped. So we stop and start projects, and we're hiring event centres, we're hiring all sorts of places to bring the kaumatua together. But if COVID jumps up in Auckland, we have to cancel. And so this is becoming really expensive, the hiring and the cancelling, flights hiring and cancelling. But I just wanted to show you some of the experiences that we had straight after COVID working with kaumatua. And this is a group from the far north, and this is another group from the far north. And this is what we do. We go away and we stay with them for 2 days in a nice hotel, and then we get their life stories that way. Usually our research process is what we would say kanohi te kanohi, face to face. But during that period of COVID, we actually did our research process online. And it's not quite as good online. It's better if you can eat with them, talk with them, sit with them. It's very intense. But from our research with kaumatua, we've been able to really examine, their feelings about COVID, because they are responsible for their whole families. They are very powerful. They can influence their children as to whether the grandchildren take an injection or not. They are calling the shots. They are making the tikanga. So for me as a researcher, and I fell upon this quite accidentally, that working with kaumatua, because they have at least 80 years of life experience, when you put all that together in a space, a lot comes out. So I'm not only learning about COVID, I'm learning about climate change, environmental issues, I'm learning about the wars, I'm learning about kai, or food, Māori medicines. I'm learning about so much stuff that it's hard to bear sometimes. And you really, we need to have more people in our research centre to deal with all the data that we have, and also we need to protect the data more, because the data, when we're creating these new research projects, the new knowledge actually belongs to them, not the university. And this is the difficulty that we have, because the university's just created this new Google Drive where everything we do goes onto the university's Google Drive, and it's around the ownership, the property ownership of this material. So we're working through that sort of data sovereignty issue right at the moment. And we're working on it with the kaumatua. But, we've got so many things happening. And what started as a small COVID project has become this huge project, because they really care about the world, and they have solutions to a lot of the problems, not all problems, but they have helped researchers like Nick really understand ethics, really understand the notion of data sovereignty, really understand how to manaaki or look after people. They've made us understand the significance of relationships, and that relationships should not be taken for granted. And if you look back at the relationship that my tribe initially had with Queen Victoria, which was nothing, when they invaded our territory, there was no relationship. But over the years, that constant effort on our part has created some type of relationship where in 1995, my tribe were the first Māori tribe to actually get a treaty settlement with the Crown. And so they gave back a pittance of the land that they took, because you can't get private land back. And of course they gave all the land back to, they gave all the people that fought against the Māoris, the soldiers, then decided they wanted to become farmers. And so they were rewarded for fighting with us and given our lands to them in Crown grants. And then they are like the 7th generation established farmers that have all the power in New Zealand. But through the kingitanga, the chiefs, the paramount chief and all of those chiefs, we've been able to get recognition from not only the New Zealand government, but the Crown in England. And now we are, and there's problems with that too, but I'll just say this good side, is that we have money and we have rebuilt the iwi. I mean, there's all sorts of problems when you rebuild from nothing, and there's nepotism. You know, you're a tribal group, there's nepotism, and there's all sorts of things that aren't quite fair. There's still an unfairness that exists, and we're kind of perpetuating what happens in the Western society, you know. But at least there's mana, and that's the sort of, you can hold your head up high that you now have land, you now have places to go. And that is the beauty of our research, is to get the researchers I work with, who are often city slicker Māoris. You know, these are Māoris that are Māori, they look it, but they actually haven't ever lived like me on a marae. And that is kind of my point of difference often, is that I was born in Huntly, I grew up on a marae, and I still have a house on a marae. A lot of the Māori students we have that come to us, especially in Auckland, have never lived on a marae. Sometimes they don't, they know they kind of have a sort of fantasy about where they might have come from, but they actually don't have any real living whakapapa connections to where they are. So they're relearning a lot in a safe space at the university. But I think my cultural, I don't know what it's called, what's cultural capacity, cultural capital that I have is really important, and it allows me to manoeuvre my way through things. And just having been with my grandparents and been with their friends when I was young, there's a real trick to engaging kaumatua. And so when we're working with, can you go back to whenua, buddy? Yeah. So when you're working with people like this, she's 83, and she actually was the first Māori woman to ever get a PhD. She went to Oxford. She doesn't suffer fools, and so you have to be able to give it on all sides. And what I'm trying to say here is that for those of us who are Māori researchers at the University of Auckland, we're still very much a minority. You wouldn't think it, even though we have all this great stuff happening in our country. I think we still have only 1% of our faculty is Māori out of the whole of the university. We don't have very many Māori students. They prefer to go to the Māori universities or the wānangas, and it's really still very challenging to be Māori in the university. Even though I'm together and I know my stuff, it's still really challenging. I just don't want to make out like it's easy. You can get to the end. And so this year, after all our research that we did in COVID and with old people, Ashley Bloomfield, who was the Director General of Health during COVID, he was the man that was on TV with Jacinda Ardern every day. And he's quite nice. He came to visit us. This is Ashley. He's a celebrity now. They have T-shirts for him. Everybody loved him. Even the kaumatua loved him. But he came to visit us at the James Henare Research Centre, and there's some of the staff there. And he thanked us for our contribution to the COVID research, and it was great. And next slide. And just 2 weeks ago, we just won a really huge infectious disease project, and it's the biggest piece of research money that's ever been awarded to the arts faculty, which is $2 million to look into infectious disease in Māori. And I'm not even a health person, I'm actually an environmental anthropologist. Just shows you can do anything. Yeah, and so it's really, when it comes to research, it's about leading teams. It's not about knowing the most. What it is about is getting the people that know things and people that are willing to work as a team and pulling them together and encouraging them to keep going, and also bringing kaumatua on your team who are knowledgeable about things. And that's how I do research. I think this talk's gone a bit off track, but it doesn't matter, I think. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of the sort of work that we do at the James Henare Research Centre, and also to talk about real life COVID research, and that it's not all done in the laboratory. It doesn't all have to be white coat stuff. It can be very human, and it can be very practical and very inclusive. And that's the thing that I just really want to say today. So nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Did you get it?
If there are questions, please go ahead. And we have mics that we can pass around.
Thank you so much. I have a question. I believe you said that Māori don't believe that you can get COVID, or I presume any infectious disease, from Hongi or Harirū. Can you say more about that? Did I understand that correctly?
No, you can.
No. Okay.
You can, because scientifically you can with the spittle, that's where the virus is. But what we didn't want to happen, I didn't explain it very well, is that in the story, in the pūrākau, when Tāne Mahuta is blowing breath into Hene Ahuone, that's blowing life into her, that we didn't want the virus thing to be attached to our pūrākau. Do you know what I mean? So it's like you've got the pūrākau, or the story, which is part of our cosmology, our origin stories. We wanted to keep that separate from the fact that the virus can be blown into, and that was the point we were making, is that, yeah, we get it, but we don't want to think about it that way. Yeah. So yeah, I probably didn't explain that well. And because back then there was no virus, you see, so.
Marama, after the end of COVID, when there was fewer lockdowns and things, were there sort of retroactive tangihanga that groups engaged in, or was this just a lost opportunity and something that for most people it was just gone and really couldn't be made up in some way afterwards?
Well, there isn't a tikanga for that yet, so but we don't usually do retroactive or retrospective tangihanga. It has to be done on the time, because that's your time. And what we did do is create tikanga around who could participate. So usually when you have a tangihanga, you have to come in person and grieve. But during this period, and it was for my sister as well, because she lives in Phoenix, Arizona, and we had the curfew, there was no airplanes coming into New Zealand, and she actually had COVID when Dad passed away. So we were allowed by agreement with our kaumatua that Dad's tangihanga, parts of it could be videoed, what is live streamed. And this was something that emerged in COVID. Never before had funerals or tangihanga funerals been live streamed or Zoomed. You have to turn your phones off. So during this period of COVID, a new tikanga emerged in order to wrap love around the family and make people present, that the kaumatua agreed that you could live stream tangihanga. Not the body in the coffin, not the tūpāpaku in the coffin, but the actual ceremonies, and see the faces of the living people, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's how we deal with it. And actually, John, when there was only 10 people allowed, what you could do was stand at the side of the road in your house and wave the hearse as it went past. That was not the best, but...
During lockdown, you were interviewing kaumatua. What were some of the questions you were asking, and what were the biggest takeaways you got from those interviews?
Oh, they were really basic questions, like, What did you do today? Who has visited you today? Has anybody, because in New Zealand too, iwi took care of their kaumatua and brought them packs, food packs, medicine packs, sanitisation packs. So you would be asking, what tribal support have you received today? And a lot of them would say things like, crikey, I've received another box of groceries. And it would be like, I don't even like this food. I mean, it was very honest. And so often the response to looking after kaumatua wasn't coordinated, and you would have different groups of people all delivering stuff, and then they'd start panicking because they didn't have big enough fridges to accommodate all of this food that they would be giving, and so they were redistributing it amongst their family. So they were very basic questions about what they were doing during the day. Who's visited you today? What did you do today? What did you think about the noon briefing today? How do you feel about only seeing Jacinda Ardern and Ashley on the TV? But they were pretty open questions, and those seem like pretty closed questions, but they were very basic, and we allowed them to talk about whatever they wanted to. But they all got asked the same question. So every time we interviewed them, because we did 3 repeat interviews as well, they were always asked the same question. And it was really interesting to see how a lot of them really loved being in lockdown, because it took their responsibilities off them, that they're usually having to go to tangis or look after their grandchildren or turn up and facilitate meetings or always having to do things for their community. And this was a time when they were on holiday. And so usually when you're on holiday as a Māori, if you're a kaumatua, you're not on holiday, but this was an enforced holiday. So they got really healthy during that time, and they started experimenting with their meds, like going off their meds and sort of questions like that. And then at the end of it, we asked them more historical questions, because a lot of them were around during the TB pandemic and other times when we've had typhoid and cholera. So we were asking them about other experiences of infectious disease as well. But they weren't hard questions. We never asked them really private, personal questions, but often, because you're their only contact, they tell you all sorts of things that aren't even related to COVID. Yeah.
Hi. Similar to how the rest of the world might have changed, considering we're 3 years on from COVID, and how certain practices that we've had, like Zoom calls and things like that, might have continued in the Western world. Has traditional Maori practices returned to their original form, or is there sometimes hybrid or maybe some carry on from COVID procedures?
Well, that's a really great question, because what I didn't explain to you is that in our research extends from the top of the North Island, the top of Taitokero, which is Cape Reinga, which those 2 groups that I had on the show, the slideshow, they're from the top of the North Island. Those are Northern Māoris. And I'm from the west, Waikato, right down in the middle. And then we also interviewed Tauranga Moana, that's the East Coast Māoris, and then we've just finished two sites in Auckland and Tamaki. So what we're learning is that different kaumatua groups have different experiences of everything. The people in the north who are more living more remotely, who are far, far away from a hospital and don't have pharmacists around, and who don't have access to doctors, and there's no hearing clinics or dentists, they are using rongoa or Māori medicine a lot more. They are using it because it's in the bush, right where they live, and they've had all of that medicine knowledge passed down to them, and they've relied on it to keep themselves well. Their gardens, their home gardens, are a really important part of their well-being, whereas the Māoris that live in Auckland, where there has been lots of development and disruption and trauma with regard to them being squished in and squished in and squished in and squished in, and also developments coming up around them, they don't have access to a bush. They don't have access to all of that traditional knowledge, and they are telling us that they are reliant on pharmaceuticals. You know, they take their pills, they don't know those recipes anymore, and they have a different experience of growing old than the ones in Waikato, who are, the temperature is a lot lower and it's a lot damper. they are sort of half-half. They're using a thing called kumara hau, but they're also extremely reliant on chemists and pharmaceuticals and doctors. And then the tauranga moana ones, they're in the worst situation of all from our study, is that there were a lot of cancer people in that group. There are many cancers in tauranga because of the implementation of the new port that has all the chemicals in tauranga. And so they are dealing with, they're not using Māori rongoa anymore, they're using intensive cancer chemotherapies. And so it depends where you are in Aotearoa as to your experience as to what you can do and what knowledge has been taken away to you because of colonisation, modernity and developments around you. So I couldn't speak for all and say it's all like this or it's all like this. It's very different. It's a very specific experience for those different groups. And that's been the beauty of our research. And what I need to say is one size does not fit all. A lot of what you experience is because of the environment you live in. And also, I would say in our research, I am most impressed with and I always thought I was going to feel the saddest for them because they live pretty remote and they don't have any services, they have no hospital, they have nothing. But actually when you meet them, they were the most vibrant group. They all had their gardens, they had gardening knowledge, they had figured out amongst themselves, this group of widows, who would be the driver. So they always had access to a driver, whereas the ones in Auckland, a lot of them have lost their licenses and they just haven't had that years of creating that relationship of reliance. And they've become, they're reliant on their children, but this kaumatua group were reliant on each other. And they created their own weaving group and their own kapahaka group, and they have more self-determination in the remote areas. And I thought that I was going to be feeling sorry for them, but I actually would like to go and join them when I get older. And my own kaumatua in the Waikato, I think, have the hardest job because they are following a movement and uplifting a Māori king. And that is hard work, 52 weeks of the year when he decides he wants to go somewhere, he has to travel with this big group of kaumatua who have to legitimate his being. And so they are sitting in the cold and in the rain and in the hot, and sometimes there's no bathrooms around for them to go, and so they're sitting there for a long time, and they sometimes forget to take their meds, and their health is not really that intact, although their well-being in their mind that they're doing something that means something to them, they are very strong that way culturally. And so, what's happening around you influences your personal well-being and what...
Okay, the last question here.
This isn't a very good question.
It's going to be a great...
So you were talking about one group having higher cancer rates. So what you said that was caused, was that industry that caused that?
Yeah, so in Tauranga Moana is the most beautiful place. It is where all the old white people go to retire. That's how beautiful it is.
So it's your Florida?
It's Florida. Tauranga is Florida. And so what's happened is all the Māoris who lived in Tauranga around that beautiful water, half of the harbour was taken under the Public Works Act and a port was built there. So they create a port to bring the ships into, and there's a train rail there, and it's also the place where they bleach the trees that are going to, the pine trees, from the trees that you cut down to go overseas. They do some bleachings of the trees, insecticide the trees, but it's also the place where you have a port. There's lots of other chemical things that are there. There's petroleum, there's chemical works, I don't know what the chemicals are, but all of that development has created very bad air. It's polluted the air where the Māoris live. It's polluted the harbour, so there's no seafood in the harbour anymore, and the Māoris were still collecting seafood from that area, and so now it's pretty much like what's happened at Akwesasne, and where the Mohawks are. They have high PCBs in the water, and it's gone into the people's bodies, and they are now experiencing cancers. And even though there have been tests and they've found that there's pollution in the area, it's a port. And it's important for New Zealand to have a port somewhere, and it's close to the forestry and it's close to all sorts of other important industry. And so what they've said to the Māoris is, because the marae is right next to the port, and they've actually asked the Māoris there if they would like to go somewhere else. They should go somewhere else so the port can be expanded. But these Māoris were there first, and they're so mad they will not give up their marae. But on either side of them, you've got the ships across the road, kind of like Ganawagi, and then you've got these other industrial things, and Māoris are forced to live there. But Tauranga Moana is a big place, right? This place, Tauranga. But all the wealthy non-Māori people go and live where it's much nicer. And what's happened is the fact that we suddenly have this emerging population of older non-Māoris, they're coming to live in Tauranga when they're about 60. They suck up all the health. They suck up all the health services. They suck up all the everything. And Māoris who are living there don't get access to the health services because they're taken up by these new people to Tauranga. And also what's also happened is because there's a desire for more land in Tauranga, the rents have escalated for the Māoris who live there, so they're kind of being pushed out anyway. And this is the problem. I'm sure that's the problem in Florida as well. But this is what's happened to the Tauranga Māori. And so all of that pressure and worrying about finances as well as the air pollution has really impacted on their health and well-being. And so now they're being pushed right out of Tauranga. And it's quite a sad story. Yep.
Marama, thank you so much for this wonderful talk, for being here. Please join me in thanking Dr. Marama-Muru Lanning for coming all the way from New Zealand.